Where there is light, there is darkness. That is a tale as old as time. Even older than the saying itself. In order to have heroes to save the day, you need something that friends that day. That has been the purpose of the Force of Darkness in essentially all forms of fiction. Greeting interwebs, it's Jacket K, and welcome back to Overseer October, where I make videos talking about the world of my fantasy, one that I hope to flesh out into a reality someday. You know, it's funny, but as I was brainstorming what to talk about for this year, it occurred to me that I practically never talked about the antagonists that make up the world of the Overseer of the Elements. Even though some of them are even older than some of the recent heroes that I've made up for these stories. Maybe it's because I subconsciously want to keep them hidden in order to more easily keep the plot a surprise. Maybe it's because I'm just biased towards our protagonists, resulting in a snowball effect of being more familiar with them, so I draw them more, but because I draw them more, I'm more familiar with them. Regardless of the reason, I think it's time to finally break free from the cycle of silence and have some fun with the bad guys. So, welcome to the darkness of the world of Overseer of the Elements. Before I talk about specifics on the antagonists, I need to share more detail of the world of Overseer of the Element itself, to better describe how they fit into it. As described in the past, there are 4 elements that make up the power of Mai that the people of this world use. In the past I referred to them as Earth, Wind, Fire, and Water, though I've been trying to branch it out so that the categories are a bit more general, give me a little more creativity with the types of abilities I can create. So don't be surprised if I start trying to refer to them more as land, sky, heat, and water. There are also 2 other forms of Mai outside of basic elements, used in exceptional cases. First, Mai that represents the order of the world, often known as light, and the Mai that symbolizes the will of the world, as well as the people, commonly referred to as dark Mai. These powers lie as equal, yet opposing forces. When darkness grows to the point of chaos, the guiding light chooses a champion to oppose it. As you might expect, our protagonists are depicted through the light, while the antagonists through darkness. To the people of this world, that is the law of the land. These wielders of dark Mai, minions of darkness as they're commonly known as, come in a variety of factions and forms. Different factions getting the spotlight depending on the type of story I want to tell. For now, I'll be focusing my talks on one faction in particular, as they take on the leading antagonist role for most of the stories I wish to tell, including the main opening story to the dream RPG I would use to tell the world of Overseer of the Elements. And assuming I get to the point where I can actually make the game to tell it. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to that faction. Meet the Shadowclaw. The Shadowclaw is a group of minions of darkness taking on the shape of anamorphic lion cubs, with a variety of mooks, usually also taking on the forms of one of these creatures. The most common of these mooks consists of the Shadow Cubs, with a large round variant of them called Roly Cubioles. The size of the latter may seem intimidating at first, but their general innocent and naive nature make them come off more as comedic relief rather than intimidating forces. You gotta balance out the fact that they're early game enemies somehow. Anyways, Shadowclaw mooks can come in essentially any shape or form I imagine. Well, at least while still fitting the feline theme. But it is my game, so if that ends up being a rule that I feel needs to be broken, I'm sure I'll find a way. I probably won't flesh out exactly which ones get used until I actually start making the game itself. But that being said, I have done a drawing exercise once or twice where I try to come up with as many potential mook ideas as possible, so if I can find them in my sketchbook, maybe I'll flash a few of the sketches on the screen as we speak. While there's still room for flexibility to the exact number of Shadowclaw siblings that head the organization, there are 5 in particular that I currently have planned to be the main face of the Shadowclaw organization. First off, we have Eyes, who I consider the big brother of the organization. Eyes has a calm and collective aura to him, and ironically enough, I would use the word chivalrous to describe him. He views his actions as a minion of darkness more as a responsibility for the greater good, rather than out of malice. Doing evil things is quote-unquote a job to him, and not something that he takes personally. Probably his most defining personality trait is his desire for fair combat. He prefers testing a hero's skill in one-to-one combat rather than engaging in unfair tactics. He's not totally innocent in terms of getting his paw dirty for the greater quote-unquote good of the bad guys. He is a minion of darkness, so despite having a sense of honor, you are setting yourself up for disaster if you put too much trust into him. A good example of him in action is a concept I have for one of the dungeons of Overseer of the Elements, where you would meet up with Eyes at the end of said dungeon. One of the main goals of Book 1 is to get to each of the soul spots and awakening yourself to said power. So you're going for the soul spot, maybe fighting some of the minions along the way, but at the very end, you find Eyes. After a bit of exchange, he would request to face off against the main protagonist in one-to-one combat. This could go of one of two ways. One, where you agree to the terms and face off with a single party member, and another where Sarah intervenes out of concern for their safety, getting the entire party involved, which ends up ultimately making the fight even harder, as he would summon mooks to even out the numbers. With various contradicting moments like this, it can be a bit hard to get a read on his feelings or intent at the time. But ultimately it boils down to him caring more about his duties as a minion of darkness, and following out his personal code with dealing with it. Much to the dismay of other minions of darkness that would prefer either taking a more chaotic approach, or that actually have malice intent. He often embraced unwritten but well-established rules of being a minion of darkness. Things like not hurting innocents not directly involved in the conflict between light and dark, and not holding grudges if he fails, and how he tends to view heroes more as rivals rather than direct enemies to conflict against. That being said, he has a code of honor, so hypothetically if someone higher up than him were to ask of something otherwise, he would not hold his morals above theirs. Not like it's likely, if not flat out impossible, for someone to have authority over him. And if push comes to shove, he will put preservation of himself or his siblings over his personal code. Now for some fun trivia. Eyes is actually the first antagonistic OC that I made, and he's been around about as long as Sarah herself. So he's essentially been there since the conception of Overseer of the Elements itself. And since this OC's been a thing since childhood, there are things that kinda come off childish. For example, Eyes is called Eyes because that sounds cool when you're a little kid, and have the same mindset as thinking the word jacket sounds cool. Especially before you realize that it's spelled with an E and not an I. If anything, Eyes is actually an acronym, but so nonsensical as an acronym that part's not really even relevant anymore. It used to stand for evil, yellow, eager. You kind of get the point that I was just throwing random words together. And actually, the more I think about it, I think I decided that it was an acronym after I decided on the name, which would be why the letters that make up the acronym are just random, which is why, just forget about it. It's definitely not canon anymore. It's just fun trivia. Next member I want to show off is Bulky. He's the muscle of the Shadowclaw organization, though he isn't just a brute. He does have the strength to lift and throw boulders with ease, but his mind is weak, making him fairly low rank outside of the troops he commands. Yes, troops. Minions that fall under his league are commanded in a military-like fashion. You know that first voice that comes to mind when you think of a drill sergeant? That's exactly what Bulky sounds like, both in voice and his mannerism. His stern and aggressive mannerism results in anyone under his command following his orders with fear. However, if the shoe is on the other foot, and he is in a scenario where he's a subordinate, his personality does a complete 180, where he's a complete pushover to those above him, such as his older siblings. So he's often bossed around by his older siblings, and is rarely taken seriously by the other heads of the Shadowclaw organization, literally just being early game filler. You fight him early on in your adventure, and after that he relies on teaming up with other Shadowclaw heads, or through commanding his troops, in order to stand a chance against you later on in the adventure. Up next on my list is the mechanical head of the Minions of Darkness, commonly known as Tinker, as in the Tinkerer. She's utterly fascinated with machines and technological advances, to the point where she prioritizes making advances in her machinery and technical skills over actually being evil. Relatively chill, but often put in scenarios where her obsessions becomes a major obstacle. For example, she quickly becomes an obsessive fan of Techie after learning about her advances in mind technology. As the plan currently is, you first meet up with Tinkerer in Techie's lab as she's showing you around the place. Techie's lab is so huge that it becomes a dungeon in of itself, and a lot of the enemies that attack you are actually hurt machines that have gone haywire. While investigating of what's going wrong, you find that Tinkerer is just messing around with the robotics and turning them against the party for the fun of it. A bit later on, you come across the means to allow Techie to be a party member proper, with her discovering an old earth-wheeling machine that she fixes up and uses as her own. This utterly fascinates Tinker, and is the breaking point of her truly embracing her antagonistic role. This point going forward, she not only will mess around with any machinery she sees for the fun of it, but she'll intentionally make destructive machines and put them in the path of the party, just so she can impress Techie, in the Lion Cub's twisted mind. Tinker's relationship to Techie is essentially parasocial, to the point that it makes Techie pretty uncomfortable. Just to re-emphasize, Tinker isn't evil by nature, it's just the context that makes her an antagonistic force. Outside of unintentionally doing everything in her power to make Techie want to get a restraining order, Tinker isn't really that full of malice. Deep down inside, she's just a big nerd with zero social awareness, and completely clueless of how the consequences of her actions affect others. After that, I have the Paw. They are the creative head of Shadowclaw, pretty much embracing every artist trope I know, and loves all forms of art, not just traditional art, despite the design focusing a lot on the painter drawing aspect of art. They wield the power of darkness through their brush, and with it can paint up essentially anything their heart desires. In fact, him literally repainting his minions is my in-universe explanation for enemy recolors. We'll see if I have to actually resort to that in game development though. They are very passionate for their works, and can get lost in their own world as they talk about it. Much to the dismay of their siblings, they can get awfully distracted while appreciating the fine arts, often getting described as airheaded because of it. Last but certainly not least is Illuda. She's the second oldest sibling, and described as the big sister of the Shadowclaw organization. Even with Eyes being the main sibling in charge, Illuda still holds a major amount of power in the organization. They often have conflicting ideals and goals for the organization. Like said before, Eyes holds being evil as a responsibility and needs to have restraint through rules and order, while Illuda thrives on manipulation of others and prefers to bend the rules, especially if the ends justify the means. She'll often boss around younger siblings and rope them into her own schemes, occasionally even behind Ai's back. Her character interactions tease having a little bit of personal history with past heroes and villains, which ties back to why she's less sympathetic on them. But this isn't a personality trait that ties directly into Book 1, as much as it is foreshadowing to future stories, so we'll see if I ever get around to telling them. After all, Book 1 has to get finished first before anything beyond that can get told. Her powers specialize in lightning and illusions, and is teased throughout the adventure that she used to specialize in Wind Mai, before fully becoming a Darkness Mai user. For example, there's times that she referenced that Wind Mai used to be significantly stronger, before that power weared away, and was eventually adopted by the power of Light Mai, which may or may not be meta commentary on the way certain powers work in my inspirations compared to how they work in Overseer of the Elements. Being a master of illusions and trickery, I can't talk too much about her relevance in the plot without giving away too much, so hopefully you enjoyed what I was able to share. In recent times, it's also rumored that there's also a Lord of the Lions that leads the entire organization from behind the scenes, but that is something I definitely don't have intentions on going into anytime soon. These are the main 5 that head the Shadowclaw organization, though the group is intentionally designed to have room for expansion, depending on what stories I want to tell in the future, and if I want to make side stories but still want to include this antagonistic force in some shape or form, while still bringing something fresh and new to the table. Probably the best example of this is an OC I have made very recently called Gardenia. She is a member of the Shadowclaw that loves plant life and treats it in a higher regard than all other forms of life around her. She uses her dark mind to grow and nurture plants, some of them becoming sentient and fighting under her command. I made her very recently, and I've slowly made her so I could have antagonistic force for Firebrand Dash, the platformer I'm working on, if I ever expand to the point of having a narrative. Long story short, Sarah and friends go on a picnic. She kidnaps the soul spirits that are hanging out with them with her plants, and Sarah goes after to bring the soul spirits back. If you couldn't tell, the main reason she specializes in plants is because the only obstacles they make for Firebrand Dash are literal bushes and tree stumps, so a leader of plants seems like the natural extension of this. You know, assuming I get to the point where I extend it that far. The only other idea that comes to mind currently when it comes to members of Shadow Claw is this idea that I have for an optional boss. Essentially a discarded member of the Shadow Claw. A long time ago, I came up with an idea of an optional boss that takes inspirations from the ending of Mario and Luigi Partners in Time. You know, the battle where you can only counterattack for the duration of the entire fight. This is an enemy that I made specifically to host the gimmick of this fight. I do confess it was so long ago, I don't remember the exact name, at least not until I dug for my old notes, because I have dozens of text documents specifically to keep track of any lore of my characters, and dozens of other concepts related to Overseer of the Elements. Luckily, the name of this character wasn't one of them, so we'll go off that. So, the Shadow Claw member is apparently called Tic Tac. I don't know why I gave him that name, but that's what I have written down, so we'll go with it for now. Their lore would be that they were once part of the Shadow Claw, but they were banished for their fighting style for being too unfair to actually be using combat against those associated with the Guiding Light. Take a wild guess who cared enough about the rules to do that. Tic Tac doesn't take it personally though, and you have a pretty chill encounter with them up to the point of actually fighting them. We'll see if this ever pans out in-game someday, but it was built around the idea that I would be building the gameplay of Overseer of the Elements to include a battle system with action commands, and I'm still learning the very basics of how to build an RPG in the first place. So one step at a time, and don't make promises before you have any intention to keep them. After all, you gotta learn how to make a boss before you can make a super boss, let alone a gimmicky one. Besides, there's so much else that goes into game design that even if all the mechanics survive between my head to actually being implemented in code, which is a stretch in of itself, there's so many other ideas I have for post-game and other optional features. I highly doubt something like this would make it far past the cutting board. And with that said, this has been a pretty beefy video, just from talking about the Shadow Claw. So while I could go on about lore for other antagonists beyond the Shadow Claw, I think it's better to save that for its own video. We're already well into October before I even start editing any of this. So as much as I want to keep talking, I don't even want to promise another video until I finish editing this one. So thank you all for coming to my TED Talk on just a sliver of the OCs that make up the bad guys of my world of Overseer of the Elements. If you enjoyed watching this video, please give it a like, and feel free to comment if you want to talk more or had any questions in particular. Feels like my channel hasn't been doing the greatest, and I'm sure going to something very niche and personal on top of it all isn't helping matters. So any form of appreciation makes me feel warm and giddy inside, which makes all the work that goes into making a very niche editorial video like this all the more worthwhile. So if it's not too late in the month, I'll see you for another Overseer October video. Either way, I hope you take care.